VikesNow, Dustin Baker on a solo trip today, and we are breaking down Jets at Vikings, a 7-4 team, AFC East, coming into the Glass Palace to take on the 9-2 Vikings. Who'da thunk it? Way back in July, August, early September, Vegas Sportsbooks had this team pegged around 8.5 wins. They got a little liberal and did 9 wins as the kickoff started to hit around week 1. But yeah, they've shattered it. They hit the mark. Now everything is gravy, and anything, let's be honest, that is, I would say, less than a 13-4 record would feel like a disappointing December. So that's where we're at, and I'm going to go through 7 items that I consider storylines between Jets and Vikings. They only play each other once every 4 years, and this is the first time the Jets have been here in 8. So let's start the chat. The first one is, I know where you're going to go with this. You're going to be like, oh yeah, baby. Sauce Gardner versus Justin Jefferson. And what you're thinking, rightfully so, is I can't wait to see those two dudes matched up against each other. That's not what I care about. I want to know if they actually match up against each other. Per Pro Football Focus, Sauce Gardner is the top cornerback in the NFL, at least through Week 13. It could fluctuate. Hopefully it fluctuates after this week and his ass gets humbled down to 5th best or something like that. And then Jefferson is 1 yard behind Tyreek Hill via receiving yards. So this is Creed versus Balboa, but I don't know that they will line up against each other. I mean, that's basically up to the Jets and Robert Saleh and the defensive coordinator for New York. So what I want to see, be able to tell pretty early on is this mano a mano, or, because he usually lines up on the other side of the field that wouldn't be Jefferson's, and therefore would cover Adam Thielen more and leave DJ Reed to have to deal with Jefferson. So I think it's a foregone conclusion or self-evident that it would be wonderful to see the rookie Gardner versus the third-year phenom Jefferson. But I don't know if it's a guarantee that those two go at it, one-on-one, like on a basketball court. Jordan versus Magic or something like that. I think it'll be interspersed, and we'll see it every now and then perhaps late in the game it'll be every snap. But I want to know if it really is going to be those two against one another right away, because I think the salivating narrative is to think that's what you're getting this week, the league's best corner and the league's best wide receiver. And I don't know that it'll necessarily be that throughout the entire game. So sorry to pour a little cold water on that, but we shall see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're locked up every single snap. We shall see. Next is Mike White Mania. White Mike. He took over for Zach Wilson, who was benched and has a very interesting and confounding career trajectory going forward. But Mike White last year did this same shit. I think I've talked about that this week. He got the nod in the middle of the 2021 season. Looked like Dan Marino against the Bengals, I believe, tossing over 400 yards and a couple touchdowns. And then the next week, it was meh. It was decent. It wasn't horrible. And then it went too horrible against the Bills, and he tossed an offer for touchdowns and 4 picks. And, we never thought we'd see him again. Fast forward to 2022, and we're seeing his ass again. And he looked wonderful against the depleted Bears defense, who don't have Robert Quinn, don't have Roquan Smith anymore. So, and then you say that, and you're like, so yeah, the Vikings will get a hold of the guy. I don't know. The Vikings defense isn't very good either. They rank 32nd, which, checks notes, is the last in the NFL per passing yards allowed. Nobody in the business surrenders more passing yards to opposing quarterbacks than the Vikings. That's attributable to this damn bend but don't break through quarters 1, 2, and 3. The Vikings defense basically says, go do your thing. Go run up a little lead because we're going to come beat you. We will. Go get your, 17-7 lead, and we're going to come marching back in the fourth quarter. I guess more realistically, 24-17 lead. And we're going to come back, and we're going to win. So the Vikings defense isn't very good until the game really means something. But Mike White has a chance to prove a road win against the 9-2 Vikings. We're kind of scarred, like, oh, this asshole's going to light us up because backup quarterbacks always do that. But Mike White is in a very big spot to prove that, he should be the QB1 for the rest of this year. And then who knows going into 2023, because the Jets won't have a high draft pick to draft one of the supreme quarterbacks from the 2023 draft class. So In the defense of the Vikings, we're spouting, I don't want to play a backup quarterback because we lose to Cooper Rush and Chase Daniel and all these other idiots. But the Vikings are 3-0 against backup quarterbacks in 2022. So it's up to your perception whether or not you consider Mike White a backup. I think technically he is until he's not. But does the mania continue? Because if he comes in like Mac Jones, who was wonderful against the Vikings and then atrocious last night against the Bills, then we got a problem. We can't stop Mike White or Mac Jones when we get to the postseason and, you face Jalen Hurts again or Dak Prescott, who we've already been torched by, then there's going to be serious problems. If you can't solve Mike White in a home game with a 9-2 record, first game in December, one of the most important month of the regular season, that won't be very good. We'll still find traces of optimism because it'll be as bad as 9-3. However, losing it to Mike White at home in a noontime slot that usually is favorable to this brand of Vikings and past brands of Vikings would be borderline unforgivable. The next one is Tyler Conklin comes back home. He jettisoned to the Jets in the offseason, got 3 years, $20.5 million, a decent tight end contract. Last year, he tallied 500-something yards for the Vikings and was the saving grace when Irv Smith tore his meniscus against the Chiefs in the preseason summer of 2021. Up until then, Conklin was a fringe TE2, TE3. That there was some men and women that were rah-rah, like this guy can be good. Well, it turns out those folks were right, and he was indeed a starting TE1 in the NFL. Fast forward again, 2022, he plays for the Jets, and he's emulating his stat line almost to a T based on what he did in 2021 with Kirk Cousins. He's on pace for 500-something yards and about 5 touchdowns. I think he had 3 with the Vikings, but the Conklin experiment in New York looks pretty good. They're not giving him tons of targets, like Kelsey-ish targets, but nobody really does that in general besides the Chiefs. But Conklin gets to come back, play his old team, and those storylines are always interesting. I don't know how much of an impact he'll have. He'll probably have 40 yards or something like that. But in theory, he could always pop off and do something very mean to his old team. But with those past player storylines, Conklin foremost, he'll get the most action. And then Mike Remmers, number one in your hearts. He played for the Vikings in 2017 and 2018. He's on the active roster. He doesn't really play. He's basically like their version of probably Chris Reed. Chris Reed's better than Mike Remmers right now, but yeah, he would be, if something happens to one of the offensive linemen for the Jets, Remmers could get a nod. And then on the practice squad, Chaz Surratt, a 2021 third rounder in Rick Spielman's final draft. He plays for the Jets, but he's on the practice squad. He was elevated last week, or so I've heard, and perhaps that'll happen again. And then Drew Samia, he is on the injured reserve. His landing spot after the Vikings said, no more, no thanks, don't come back. He went to the Jets and hasn't played since, but he's on the roster. So Conklin foremost, and then those other relationships between former teams. Number 4 is Kevin O'Connell. During his underwhelming playing career, he spent the most time with the Jets. Of course, we talked last week about how he was drafted by Belichick and the Patriots and only spent one offseason there. And then he traveled to the Jets, where he spent 2009 and 2010. And that, if I'm recalling correctly, that was the only spot where he stayed for longer than a year. So we don't have a gangbuster quarterback as our coach, but we got a pretty damn good head coach in the making at 9-2, and coincidentally, he spent most of his playing career in 2009, 2010 with the New York Jets. Does that matter? It does to me, because those are always intriguing, but I don't know if he cares. Although, if you watch the Vikings 5-minute mic'd up clip with Kevin O'Connell, in the beginning, he embraces with a hug or a salutation to Bill Belichick. And O'Connell said, I know I wasn't there very long, but you taught me a lot and laid the framework. So, it lays a little credence to sometimes those franchise foundational ties do have relevance. And I can guarantee you O'Connell remembers playing for the Jets. So he gets to play his old team at noon on Sunday. Here's another juicy one, and it's probably getting ahead of myself, but if indeed the Vikings effectuate this 3-point favorite status, and we all know they're not going to win by, well, I'm predicting that they win 27-13, spoiler, but that's probably not going to happen. They're going to win by 7 or 8 points if they win. But if they do beat the Jets, these Vikings will have swept all of the AFC East, a division that is universally considered the best in football. So you got to ask yourself, to the people that call it a fraud, that these Vikings are just like the team that played the Cowboys, got beat 40-3, they're coming back to earth. Well, at some point, that earth journey has to start. Of course, the Cowboys game wasn't friendly, but at the end of that day, they were still 8-2, and now they're 9-2. And if they beat the Jets, they will have barnstormed, swept the best division in football. No, it's not the AFC West. That was false advertising. Somehow, it's the AFC East, probably because the Jets are good, and nobody really thought they'd be 7-4 through 11 weeks. They had a tremendous draft in April, and that was another thing that was universally applauded, was that draft class. But I don't know that it was shiny enough to predict a 7-4 record. I don't know, perhaps at this juncture, 5-6, 6-5, with upward, I guess, vibe that they're going to be good in the future, let alone doing all this when Zach Wilson is a fraud. So very odd. But Vikings could sweep the AFC East, which should at the very least turn heads to the naysayers that said this team is pretty damn good. Come on. All right, the next one I want to watch, and I think I already know the answer, is does the pattern continue? Because if it doesn't, the beginning of a December is a decent pivot to get rid of the old ways. What is the pattern, Mr. Baker, you ask? The pattern is scoring on the first drive, then getting out your sleeping bag and going to bed in the second and third quarter, and then suddenly somebody on the sideline says, hey, we got to win this game. We can't keep doing this shit. And then on defense and offense, collectively, they go win the game. I don't like that pattern. I will take it because it has worked to the tune of 9-2, but it really bugs the shit out of me because there has to be somebody in some office in Egan, at Viking Manor or whatever it's called, that realizes you can do all this good stuff throughout the whole game. You don't have to wait. And I know the first drive stuff is probably because O'Connell's a genius in the first 20 plays or whatever it usually is, are, real humdingers, and it causes them to score. But so often, whether I'm at home on the couch over there or I'm in the stadium at US Bank, I'm like, good God, in the second and third quarter, why do we have to leave this unshackled until the fourth quarter? Do the thing through the whole game. And so what I'll be watching for, and I hope that you do too, is does that damn pattern continue? Because if we have to live with it, we have to live with it. Hopefully, during the playoffs, it's just as stringent in the fourth quarter, but that is the way that Vikings football has led to 9 wins outside of the first game against the Packers. That was a total effort. It's the first quarter, they usually score a touchdown, and then you convinced yourself, just like I convinced myself, all right, this is the time we're going to beat somebody's ass. I'm looking at 33-7. We're gonna drive home with low anxiety. Heart rates are going to be low. You convince yourself that, all right, this is the game, and then it doesn't happen. And then the next drive comes, and you're like, oh, a 3-and-out, and then another 3-and-out. And then by the time you look at the scoreboard at halftime, it's 10-10, and the third quarter is another horror film. And then the fourth quarter, now there's enough sample size that you're like, well, we're going to win, but I don't know why it took this long. That's the pattern. Is this ineptitude in the second and third quarter, but this holiness on the first drive and then the entire fourth quarter. If that is just the way that O'Connell coaches, or Ed Donatel, the only way he knows how to coach a defense is when everybody's blood pressures are through the roof, fine, I guess it's working, but there has to be somebody somewhere, a coach, an owner, a general manager, a quarterback that's like, we should do all the good shit throughout the entire game. That's what I want to see. And correspondingly, I guess because of this eternal optimism I have, I do have the Vikings winning 27-13, which isn't an ass kicking, but I think it blends both worlds of these damn suspense thrillers and a quasi blowout. Because, let's face it, a 14-point win would feel like a big deal for these Vikings. All right, the final one I want to leave you guys and gals with is when I parted ways before last week, the amended week because of Thanksgiving. I said that the Patriots game was of ultra importance because you needed to bounce back after the beatdown by the Cowboys at home to prove that you're a Super Bowl contender. If they had lost to Mac Jones and the guys, then no, I would not be banging the drum for any February conversations because you can't lose back-to-back games at home, especially an ass beating, and then try to sell the world that, hey, we're actually pretty good. We just had a little down streak at home. If they were on the road, fine. I'd be there right with the rest of you and say, yeah, they can rebound, they can make amends. But when you lose back-to-back games at home, that is, you can't really salvage the reputation. Now, that didn't happen. They beat the Patriots, so here I am on December 2nd telling you that reasonably the Vikings can be considered Super Bowl contenders, especially if they play the complete game that I was talking about. Now, in that same vein, the litmus test. If you beat the Patriots, yes, you can be considered legitimate. If you lose the Patriots, you're probably overachieving and you're going to find a way to bungle it in the first game of the playoffs. In that same regard, this is the game against the Jets that will prove if the Vikings are serious about home field advantage throughout the postseason. Believe it or not, even after the Cowboys debacle, there is still a pathway for Minnesota to get the number 1 seed. Why does that matter? Well, because all of these terrible memories that we have after 1998 in the NFC Championship are on the road. I don't think we call that out that often. At Philadelphia, at New Orleans 2009, at New York in 2000. They were road conference championship games, 2 of which were embarrassments, and one that was just, mind-boggling against the Saints. So how do you curb that? You play at home, and the only way to guarantee you play at home is to get the number 1 overall seed, and that is still attainable right now. Why? Because the Eagles lost the Commanders a couple weeks ago. However, if Mike White beats the Vikings and Robert Saleh's defense cooking, and then you can pretty much kiss that number 1 seed goodbye. You'd pivot to gripping with a stranglehold the number 2 seed and hoping that the 49ers you can't start hearing their footsteps because right now they are 7-4, the Vikings are 9-2. 49ers are everybody's fashionable pick as the best team in the NFL that nobody's talking about, or just the best team in general based on their roster construction. And you don't want to go to San Francisco in the postseason. We've already seen that. Didn't work out 2019, 3 years ago. Don't want to do it again. I'm convinced that if this Vikings team is going to win a Super Bowl, that the NFC Championship had oughta be at home. Because all of these recent memories, since I was, 2000, since I was 17 years old, was NFC championships on the road. Of course, at home is not foolproof. 1998 Vikings can tell you all about it, but let's do the thing on championship weekend in Minneapolis for a change of pace, and then see how it goes. We had the ass beating in Philadelphia. We don't have to do that. We had 2 ass beatings in Philadelphia. There was the one on Monday night, and then there was the one in January 2018 in the NFC Championship. The Vikings can reasonably still go get the number 1 seed, but they have to beat the Jets, and then they need help from the Eagles. The Eagles play the Titans this week. It's not an easy matchup, and then they also have the Cowboys and Giants on the horizon. But this is the new litmus test. If you want the Vikings to have the number 1 overall seed, they cannot lose to the Jets. If they win against the Jets, then you're on Eagles watch. Let's wait for them to drop a game and see how the chips fall. All right, that's all I got for this week, and I will be back. We don't have anything funky next week. I'll be back Monday to go through broad takeaways, and then we'll look at surprises from this game, hell or high water, on Tuesday, and then Josh Fry next Wednesday. Here's to a hopeful 10-2, and Skol, baby.